Welcome to Whiskey's a Journey. My name is Peter Faciano. Today is Monday, and I am currently doing peated scotches in this Monday series. Today, we're doing Port Charlotte 10. It's a heavily peated Islay single malt scotch coming out of Bruichladdich. 50% ABV, natural color, non-chill filtered. This is matured in ex-bourbon and ex-French wine casks. I got a 750 milliliter bottle and I paid $71.99 in Phoenix, Arizona. And I think currently it's going for $81.99. So just like always, let's go ahead and pour it, nose it, taste it, talk about it. If you stick around until the end, I am going to give it a score. I can smell the peat already. That's amazing. Again, just how fast that actually hits my nose. And I'm getting an ashy peat, not an iodine and not a smoked meat savory side of things. It's more ash, campfire, wet log kind of thing. But let's go ahead and get this thing up to my nose and dive in a little bit deeper. It's sweet, it's fruity sweet. There is a grapey note that comes out of the glass. I also get a slight amount of spice, a little bit of vanilla. With this being aged 10 years and using ex-bourbon and that ex-wine cask, those two marrying together with the vanilla and the grape, along with that ashy peat, is a good combination. I wouldn't say that, in the title or on the bottle, it says that it's heavily peated. There are other expressions that come across more peated than this. And maybe it's because of those two cask maturations along with the peat. It's well-rounded. That's what I would actually say on the nose. It's well-rounded. But I'm not going to be sitting here smelling it the entire time. So let's go ahead and give it a taste. And let's see if all of those aromas on the nose come through on the palate. All right, on the arrival, there is a little bit of sweetness followed by that ashy note. Campfire log, a little bit of pepper, some ginger. The sweetness comes into the back end of things as you're starting to finish it. That vanilla and green grape note starts to come through. Good amount of barrel tannin or barrel char on the side of the tongue. All the pleasantries that I got on the nose are coming through on the palate as well. There's a good amount of depth and complexity. And I keep going back to it, even though it says heavily peated, I don't think the peat is an overpowering note on the palate whatsoever. So let's quickly go in for that second sip. I'm gonna let it do its thing, kind of settle in, see if I can concentrate on the finish, add a little bit of water to it, talk a little bit about Bruichladdich, and then we'll give this a final nose and a taste, and we'll give it a score. On the second sip, it's more sweet than peat. That second sip always brings out a little bit more of barrel tannin or barrel char on the side of my tongue. It's always good as long as it doesn't go up over the top, and this gets right there. I like it. The 50% ABV, it lets you know that it's there. It warms up the chest. Get a little bit of feeling in the back of the throat. It's coating the entire mouth. I do get that peated note along with the sweet vanilla and grape. And I'm not a smoker in any way, but I have gotten this note before in the past, and it's coming out in this glass as well. Tobacco has a sweetness to it, not the actual smoking the cigarette itself, but when you smell a fresh cracked pack of cigarettes, tobacco has a sweetness. And that's kind of what I'm getting on the palate, a sweet tobacco note without actually having the smoke involved with smoking. That to me is just off-putting, but there is sweetness to it. All right, let's go ahead and get a couple of drops of water in here and then talk a little bit about Bruichladdich. And before I begin, I'm gonna leave a link to a video called The Water of Life. The movie dives into a little bit of the big picture of whiskey in Scotland and specifically Islay whiskey. I highly suggest you watch that if you haven't already. It was recommended to me by some of the viewers, and now I'm definitely going to recommend it to my viewers as well. Go out there and take a look at it. It does a fantastic job of humanizing the whole whiskey process. Jumping into the history of Bruichladdich, and I'm just going to refer to my notes because I have a terrible memory these days. So Barrett Harvey founded Bruichladdich in 1881. Jump ahead to 1939 when a group of Americans ended up buying the distillery. That didn't last long. World War II ended up happening, and things didn't necessarily pan out. And we're looking at 1952 when they ended up selling to a group of whiskey traders from Glasgow, which they ended up selling in 1969 to Invergordon Distilleries Limited. And then in 1993, Jim Beam ended up acquiring Invergordon Distilleries and quickly mothballed Bruichladdich. Mothballing a distillery doesn't mean that they tore it down or gutted it. They basically just put the distilling process on hold. I still believe the casks were in there, the equipment was in there. I could be completely wrong on this. They just shut it down in hopes of eventually, maybe possibly kicking up the production again. And that didn't happen until 2000. There were a group of colleagues from Murray McDavid that actually purchased the distillery from Jim Beam. And one of those guys was Mark Reiner, and he is currently the CEO of Waterford, an Irish distillery. We're going to get to that in a little bit. And Mark Reiner lured Jim McEwen away from Bowmore, where he spent the majority of his distilling life, and brought him over to Bruichladdich to become the master distiller. And then that group of guys, along with some other people, ended up building up Bruichladdich to a very prestigious distillery. Remy Martin stepped in 2012 when the board of directors from Bruichladdich eventually decided to sell to them. And according to the movie that I just recommended, The Water of Life, Mark Reiner was not happy that they ended up selling. Eventually, he went over to Ireland and opened up or started working at Waterford Distillery. He ended up introducing on a higher level scale of this whole idea of terroir, and he takes it to the nth degree. If you ever have a bottle of Waterford, there's a little QR code that comes with it. You can scan it, and it tells you anything and everything you would ever want to know about the barley, the harvesting, and everything that went into making that individual bottle. And then Jim McEwen around 2012 started to step back a little bit, and then eventually he passed the reins on to the current distiller, which is Adam Hannett. And the story goes from the movie that the black art version that Jim McEwen created, he walked into the office of Adam Hannett, gave him the recipe to the black art, and then after he left, he decided to tear up the recipe and go on his own instincts with the recipe for the dark art. So whenever you are holding one of these Port Charlotte or Bruichladdich offerings in your hand, it is definitely worth looking into the story behind it. It's fascinating. I highly recommend watching this movie. I think it's like an hour and 24 minutes. Again, the link to that movie is in the description below. I think it's free on YouTube with ads. So give it a watch. It's very interesting. And if there's any other information about the Bruichladdich distillery that you find fascinating, leave it in the comments down below so people can read about it. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing on the nose, give it one more taste, and then give it a score. With the water, there is more of a fruity note coming forward, and the peat has now taken a back seat over the sweetness. Still comes across as ashy. It's still going to be in there. It's not going to disappear for good. It's just toned down from the original pour without the water. Vanilla comes through. That tobacco sweetness is there. Pepper and ginger is still there. Let's go ahead and get it on the palate. Comes across as a little bit more spicy with the water. The ashy note of the peat is still there. It's not as sweet, and that pepper ginger note is also subdued. I think the water tones this down a little bit too much for me, and maybe it was just the amount of water that I added. It lost a little bit of its complexity and its depth with the water. I've said this in the past, you can drink your whiskey any way that you want. Going forward with me, I don't think I would add water to this. I like the nose and the palate without the water. It just adds a little bit more complexity, a little bit more depth, and I think the intensity of the flavors are there without the water. All right, so let's move on to the score. Since this is my Monday series on peated scotches, I'm going off of my peated scotch scores. I can't compare this to anything from Irish or bourbon or Japanese. So based on what I've had in this series, I'm going to give this a 4.25. I like this quite a bit. Now, I wouldn't give this a 4.25 with the water. I would drop this down below 4 with the water. But without the water, definitely a 4.25. The complexity, the depth, the oomph or the concentration of the flavors, that sweet tobacco, the vanilla, the ashy peat note, all of it put together gives this a very hearty, I wouldn't say complicated, but it's a whiskey that you can actually sit down and dissect and probably pull more notes out of it the longer that it's in the glass. So 4.25. Let me know in the comments down below where you would put Port Charlotte as far as a peated scotch goes. Is it on your list as one of your favorites? The more I have this, the more that I'm enjoying it, and it's kind of moving up the ranks with me as far as the most enjoyable peated Scotch that I have in my collection. That's gonna do it. Wherever you're at in your journey, I hope you're enjoying it. And until the next time, we're gonna be taking a look at a Kilchoman, the Loch Gorm 2022 edition. So like, subscribe, share, do all those things that YouTubers ask you to do. Turn on that bell notification because I produce videos and release them every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Cheers, everybody. Talk to you later.